My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm 32 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened just 6 months ago, but it feels like a lifetime. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after everything that's unfolded, I realized that sometimes the most painful experiences can teach us the most valuable lessons about who we really are, and who the people we love truly are beneath their masks. It was a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, and I was 9 months pregnant with my first child. 9 months of swollen ankles, sleepless nights, and the constant ache in my lower back that made every step feel like climbing a mountain. The baby was due any day, and I was desperately trying to get to my final doctor's appointment before maternity leave officially began. The subway car was packed with the usual morning rush hour crowd, business people buried in their phones, students with oversized backpacks, and tired-looking workers heading to their shifts. I had managed to find a seat in the corner, grateful to take the weight off my feet for the 20-minute ride to the medical center. My husband David sat beside me, scrolling through his phone while his mother, Patricia, stood just a few feet away, gripping the metal pole with her perfectly manicured fingers. That's when it happened. The moment that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I married and the family I had joined. David looked up from his phone, glanced at his mother, then at me sitting heavily in my seat with my hands resting on my enormous belly. Without warning, he grabbed my arm and yanked me upward with a force that sent shooting pains through my swollen joints. "Don't you dare sit when my mother is standing," he hissed through gritted teeth, his fingers digging into my arm so hard I knew there would be bruises. "Show some respect." The entire subway car fell silent. 40-something strangers suddenly found themselves witnesses to something that felt both intimate and horrifying. I stumbled slightly as I stood, my equilibrium thrown off by the sudden movement and the weight of my pregnancy. David immediately guided his 60-year-old mother to my seat, where she settled in with a satisfied smile, smoothing her expensive coat as if nothing unusual had just happened. I stood there swaying with the movement of the train, one hand gripping the pole for support, the other protectively cradling my belly. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, as if sensing my distress. My feet, already swollen beyond recognition in shoes that barely fit, began to throb immediately. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that made my eyes fill with tears, it was the humiliation, the shock, and the sudden, terrible realization that the man I had loved for 5 years had just shown me exactly where I ranked in his priorities. That's when an elderly woman sitting across from us, she couldn't have been younger than 75, caught my eye. She looked at David with disgust, then at Patricia sitting smugly in my seat, and finally at me standing there pregnant and trembling. In a voice barely above a whisper, but somehow loud enough for half the car to hear, she said just 3 words that would haunt me for months. "Shame on you." I want to share this story with you because what happened next, the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my in-laws, and my own worth, changed my life completely. If you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, if you've ever wondered whether you're asking for too much when you ask for basic respect, then please stay with me. Because what I discovered about the man I married, and what his mother had been planning all along, will shock you. But first, let me take you back to the beginning, to show you how I ended up in a marriage where giving up my seat while 9 months pregnant somehow became a test of my character rather than a moment that should have tested his. 2 years earlier, I thought I had won the lottery when it came to love. David Martinez was everything I had dreamed of in a partner, successful, charming, and from a close-knit family that seemed to genuinely care about each other. After growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes that never quite felt like home, the idea of marrying into a real family felt like finally finding where I belonged. I met David at a conference for marketing professionals in Denver. I was 29 then, working as a freelance consultant, trying to build my own business from the ground up. David was presenting on digital strategy for his family's chain of upscale restaurants, and something about his confidence and warmth drew me in immediately. When he asked me to dinner after his presentation, I said yes without hesitation. Tell me about your family, he said over wine that first night, his dark eyes genuinely interested. I love hearing family stories. I felt my stomach tighten the way it always did when this topic came up. There's not much to tell, I said carefully. I grew up in the foster system. No real family to speak of. Instead of the awkward silence or quick subject change I was used to, David reached across the table and took my hand. Then you'll love mine, he said simply. My mom has enough mothering in her for 10 kids. She's going to adore you. He wasn't wrong, exactly. Patricia Martinez did seem to adore me, at first. When David brought me home to meet his parents 3 months into our relationship, she greeted me with the kind of warm embrace I had only seen in movies. Their house in the suburbs was everything I had imagined a real family home should be: photo-lined hallways, the smell of something delicious always coming from the kitchen, and a sense of belonging that seemed to radiate from every room. Rebecca, darling, Patricia exclaimed, pulling me into her arms like we were long-lost relatives. David has told us so much about you. You're even more beautiful than he described. She held me at arm's length, studying my face with the intensity of someone memorizing details. And look at those cheekbones. Are you sure you're not part Spanish? You'd fit right into our family photos. David's father, Miguel, was quieter but equally welcoming. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, genuinely listened to my answers, and made sure my wine glass never stayed empty during dinner. Their home felt warm and alive in a way I had never experienced, filled with the easy banter of people who had shared thousands of meals together. Rebecca doesn't have any family, David explained to his parents over dessert, his hand finding mine under the table. She grew up in foster care. I cringed internally, hating how that information always seemed to define me in people's eyes. But Patricia's response surprised me. Well, you have family now, she said firmly, reaching over to squeeze my other hand. Blood doesn't make a family, love does. And we already love you. For someone who had spent most of her life feeling like an outsider looking in, those words were everything. I found myself visiting their house every weekend, helping Patricia in the kitchen, listening to stories about David's childhood, and slowly beginning to believe that I had finally found where I belonged. Patricia seemed to genuinely enjoy my company. She would text me during the week to share recipes or ask for my opinion on decorating choices. She insisted I call her Mom Pat and made a point of including me in family traditions I had only heard about from other people. When David and I got engaged 8 months later, she cried harder than I did. I prayed for the right woman for my son, she whispered as she helped me into the dress she had bought for the engagement party. And God sent me you, someone who knows what it means to need family, someone who will appreciate what we have here. The wedding planning was a dream. Patricia took charge with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting her whole life for this moment. She knew the best caterers, had connections with the most beautiful venues, and seemed to anticipate my every preference before I even knew what they were. This is what mothers do, she told me one afternoon as we tasted cake flavors. They make sure their daughters have the perfect wedding day. I never had a daughter of my own, so this is my chance to do everything I always dreamed of. I was so grateful, so overwhelmed by having someone care about my happiness with such intensity, that I didn't notice the subtle ways she was taking control. How my input was always welcomed enthusiastically, but somehow the final decisions always aligned with her vision. How she had opinions about everything from my dress to my bouquet to the music selection, and how those opinions gradually became the actual plan. David seemed thrilled that we got along so well. I told you she'd love you, he said whenever I mentioned how wonderful his mother was being. You two are going to be like best friends. And for a while, it felt like we were. Patricia and I would spend hours together, shopping, planning, and talking about everything from her childhood in Mexico to my dreams for the future. She shared stories about David's father's courtship, about building their business from nothing, about the sacrifices they had made to give David every opportunity. "Family is everything," she would say, usually while showing me photos of relatives or describing some tradition I would soon be part of. "In our culture, we take care of each other. Always. The women especially, we hold everything together." I absorbed every word, desperate to understand how to be part of a real family. I studied their dynamics like a student preparing for the most important test of her life. I learned that Patricia's word was essentially law in their household, that David's father deferred to her on most matters, and that David himself seemed to consider her opinion on everything from business decisions to what to order at restaurants. "She's just very involved," David explained when I mentioned how much input his mother had on our relationship. "It comes from a place of love. She wants what's best for us." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? Patricia was warm, generous, and seemed genuinely invested in my happiness. When she suggested I move in with them for a few months before the wedding to really become part of the family, I said yes immediately. When she helped me find a job with one of their business contacts so I could contribute to our family's success, I was touched by her thoughtfulness. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed. How she gradually isolated me from my few close friends by keeping me busy with family activities. How she had opinions about my clothes, my hair, even my choice in makeup. How she would make little comments about women who put their careers before their families whenever I worked late or traveled for business. But at the time, it felt like love. Like finally belonging somewhere. Like having a mother who cared enough to want to shape me into the best version of myself. The wedding was everything Patricia had envisioned: elegant, traditional, and perfectly executed. As I walked down the aisle toward David, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I was marrying a man I adored, gaining a family that loved me, and finally leaving behind the loneliness that had defined most of my life. In the receiving line after the ceremony, Patricia hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "You're officially my daughter now. That means you belong to this family completely. Don't ever forget that." At the time, I thought those were the sweetest words I had ever heard. I had no idea they were actually a warning about what was expected of me, and what would happen if I failed to meet those expectations. The first year of marriage was blissful. David and I found our rhythm as a couple, and I continued to feel embraced by his family. Patricia and I spoke almost daily, and she continued to treat me like the daughter she never had. When I got pregnant 6 months after the wedding, her joy seemed genuine and overwhelming. "Finally," she exclaimed when we told her the news. "I've been waiting for this moment since the day you two got engaged. A grandchild. Our family is really growing now." But as my pregnancy progressed, I began to notice subtle changes in the family dynamic. Patricia became more involved in our daily lives, more opinionated about decisions that David and I should have been making together. She had strong feelings about everything from prenatal vitamins to baby names to where we should live after the baby arrived. "You'll want to be close to family when the baby comes," she said repeatedly. "New mothers need support. I can help with everything." What I didn't realize was that her version of help came with very specific expectations about how grateful I should be, and what I owed her in return. The morning of the subway incident, I was heading to what I hoped would be my last prenatal appointment before the baby arrived. Patricia had insisted on coming along for support, and David had taken the morning off work to drive us. But his car was in the shop, so we found ourselves on public transportation during rush hour. I thought I was just going to a routine doctor's appointment. I had no idea I was walking into a test I didn't know I was taking, and that failing it would reveal the truth about the family I thought loved me unconditionally. The rest of that subway ride passed in a blur of shame and confusion. I stood swaying with each turn and stop, watching Patricia sit comfortably in my seat while David acted as if nothing unusual had happened. The elderly woman's words, "Shame on you," kept echoing in my mind, but I couldn't tell if she was talking to David, to me, or to all of us. When we finally reached our stop, I could barely walk. My feet had swollen even more during the 20 minutes of standing, and the stress of the situation had triggered what I now realize were early contractions. David helped his mother out of the seat with elaborate courtesy, then barely glanced at me as I struggled to keep up with them on the platform. "Are you okay, Mija?" Patricia asked sweetly as we climbed the stairs to street level, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look a little pale." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how she could sit there watching me suffer and then pretend to care about my well-being. Instead, I nodded and forced a smile because I had been trained, over the past 2 years, to always keep the peace where Patricia was concerned. The doctor's appointment was routine, but Dr. Chen noticed immediately that something was wrong. "Your blood pressure is elevated," she said, frowning at the readings. "And you seem stressed. Is everything all right at home?" I glanced at David and Patricia sitting in the corner of the examination room. David was checking his phone while his mother watched me with the kind of intense focus that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Everything's fine," I lied. "Just normal pregnancy nerves." But Dr. Chen wasn't convinced. After the examination, she asked David and Patricia to wait in the lobby while she spoke with me privately. The moment the door closed, I broke down completely. "I don't know what's happening to me," I sobbed. "I feel like I'm losing myself. Like nothing I do is ever good enough anymore." Dr. Chen handed me tissues and sat down beside the examination table. "Rebecca, I've been your doctor for 8 months now. I've watched you go from confident and excited about this pregnancy to anxious and uncertain. What's changed?" I found myself telling her about the subway incident, about the increasing criticism and control, about feeling like I was constantly walking on eggshells in my own marriage. As the words poured out, I realized how abnormal everything had become. "This morning, my husband made me give up my seat to his mother while I'm 9 months pregnant," I said, the words sounding insane even as I spoke them. "And somehow I'm the one who feels guilty about it." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "Rebecca, when you imagined your life as a mother, did you picture yourself teaching your child that this kind of treatment is acceptable?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on trying to fit into David's family, on being grateful for their acceptance, that I had never considered what kind of example I was setting for my unborn child. What kind of marriage was I modeling? What was I teaching them about respect, about boundaries, about their own worth? "I need you to think seriously about your support system," Dr. Chen continued gently. "New mothers need people who lift them up, not people who tear them down. Your mental health during these first months is crucial for both you and your baby." I left that appointment with more than just prenatal vitamins and instructions for the final weeks of pregnancy. I left with a seed of doubt that had been planted by a doctor who saw what I had been trying so hard to ignore. I was not in a healthy situation, and it was getting worse, not better. That evening, I decided to have an honest conversation with David. I waited until Patricia had gone home and we were alone in our apartment, hoping that without his mother's influence, he might be able to hear what I was trying to tell him. "David, I need to talk to you about what happened on the subway this morning," I began carefully. "I felt humiliated and disrespected, and I need to understand why you thought that was okay." His reaction was immediate and defensive. "Seriously, Rebecca? You're going to make a big deal out of this? My mother is 60 years old. You're young and healthy. It's called respect for your elders. I'm 9 months pregnant, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I could barely stand for 20 minutes. And you grabbed me so hard you left bruises on my arm. David glanced at the purple marks on my arm and shrugged. I didn't mean to grab you that hard. But honestly, your reaction is way over the top. My mother has done everything for you, for us, and you can't even show her basic courtesy. Basic courtesy? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David, I've done nothing but try to please your mother for 2 years. I moved in with your family before we got married. I changed jobs because she suggested it. I let her plan our entire wedding. I call her every day. What more could I possibly do? You could show some gratitude, he snapped. Do you know how lucky you are? You had nothing, no family, no real connections, and my mother welcomed you with open arms. She treats you like her own daughter. No, I said slowly, as something crystallized in my mind. She treats me like her property. And apparently, so do you. David's face darkened in a way I had never seen before. Watch your tone, Rebecca. You're being dramatic and ungrateful, and frankly, it's getting old. My mother loves you, but that doesn't mean you get to walk all over her or disrespect our family values. What family values? I asked. The ones where pregnant women give up their seats so 60-year-old women can sit down? The ones where husbands physically force their wives to do things? Are those the values you want to teach our child? Our child is going to learn to respect their grandmother, David said coldly. And if you can't figure out how to do that, maybe you need to reconsider whether you're really ready to be part of this family. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I stared at my husband, this man I had loved and trusted and built a life with, and realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time. The charm, the warmth, the apparent devotion to family, it was all real, but only if you played by their rules. Only if you accepted your place in their hierarchy and never questioned it. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened since I met David. All the times Patricia's suggestions had become mandates. All the ways my own preferences and opinions had been gradually dismissed or overruled. All the small moments when I had felt diminished but talked myself out of my own feelings because I was so grateful to finally belong somewhere. I thought about the elderly woman on the subway and her quiet words of condemnation. But now I wondered, was she talking to David for his behavior, or to me for allowing it? The next morning, I called my friend Sarah, one of the few friendships I had managed to maintain despite Patricia's efforts to keep me busy with family obligations. Sarah had been my colleague before I switched jobs, and she had always been honest with me, even when I didn't want to hear it. Sarah, I said when she answered, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think my marriage is healthy? There was a long pause. Then Sarah said quietly, Rebecca, I've been waiting 2 years for you to ask me that question. What she told me next would shatter every assumption I had made about my life, my marriage, and the family I thought had saved me from a lifetime of loneliness. But first, she said something that made my blood run cold. I need to show you something, but you have to promise me you're ready to see it. Because once you know the truth about what Patricia and David have been saying about you, there's no going back. I was 8.5 months pregnant, living in an apartment I couldn't afford on my own, married to a man who had just shown me exactly how little my comfort and dignity meant to him. But I knew I couldn't bring a child into this situation without knowing the full truth about what I was dealing with. Show me, I whispered into the phone. And that's when my entire world came crashing down. What Sarah showed me was a series of screenshots from Patricia's Facebook account, posts and comments that painted a picture of my marriage so different from my reality that at first I thought there had to be some mistake. "Look at the dates," Sarah said gently as we sat in a coffee shop the next afternoon, her laptop open between us. "These go back almost to the beginning of your relationship." The first post was from just 2 months after David and I started dating, so grateful David is finally dating someone who appreciates family values. Unlike some of the girls he's brought home, this one understands that family comes first. She's had a hard life, so she knows how lucky she is to be welcomed into our family. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was reading. Even in those early days, when I thought Patricia genuinely cared about me, she had been portraying me to her friends as damaged goods who should be grateful for their acceptance. The posts got worse as they went on. Comments about how I needed guidance in everything from cooking to dressing appropriately. Jokes about how I was like a stray cat who finally found a home and how she was teaching me how to be a proper wife. Screenshots of text messages I had sent her, shared with commentary about how needy I was and how much work it took to train someone who hadn't grown up with proper family values. But the most devastating post was from just 3 months ago, after I had announced my pregnancy. "Can't wait to meet our grandchild. Finally going to have a real family member to spoil. Poor little one will need all the love and stability we can provide, considering what they're getting from their mother's side, or lack thereof. Thank God David chose someone who knows her place in the family hierarchy." The comments from her friends were even worse. Dozens of responses calling me pathetic, expressing pity for David having to carry the whole relationship, and making jokes about how I would probably mess up the baby without Patricia's constant supervision. "There's more," Sarah said quietly, clicking to another folder. "These are from a private Facebook group she's part of. Something called Mothers of Married Sons. The things she's written about you there. I couldn't read them all." The posts detailed every private conversation I had ever had with Patricia, every moment of vulnerability I had shared, every insecurity I had confessed, all of it twisted and shared for entertainment and validation from a group of women who seemed to view their daughters-in-law as threats to be managed and controlled. One post from last month made me physically sick. "The pregnancy is making her even more demanding than usual." Yesterday she actually expected David to give up his afternoon with me to take her to a prenatal appointment that I wasn't available for. I had to remind him that his first loyalty is to the family that raised him, not the one he's creating. She'll learn eventually that being pregnant doesn't make her the center of the universe. But it was the most recent post, from the day after the subway incident, that broke something inside me completely. Had to teach the daughter-in-law a lesson in respect yesterday. She was actually going to sit on the subway while I was standing. David handled it perfectly, made her give me the seat like she should have done automatically. You should have seen her face when he grabbed her arm and pulled her up. Finally learning her place in this family. The baby's due any day now, so she'll need to understand that grandmother comes first if she wants to keep being part of this family. The post had dozens of supportive comments praising Patricia for putting me in my place and congratulating David for being a real man who knows how to handle his wife. I sat in that coffee shop, 8.5 months pregnant, reading post after post that revealed the truth about my marriage. I wasn't a beloved daughter-in-law who had been welcomed into a loving family. I was entertainment. I was a project. I was a woman with no family of her own who could be molded and controlled because I had nowhere else to go. "Rebecca," Sarah said gently, "there's one more thing. I think you need to know that this Facebook group doesn't just share stories. They share strategies. Methods for controlling daughters-in-law, for isolating them from their friends, for making sure the sons stay loyal to their mothers instead of their wives." She showed me posts that read like instruction manuals for emotional manipulation. How to make daughters-in-law financially dependent. How to gradually take over major decisions like wedding planning and career choices. How to use pregnancy and grandchildren as leverage for even more control. The worst part was reading the comments from other women congratulating each other on their successes in managing their sons' marriages. It was like discovering that what I thought was love had actually been a calculated campaign to break down my independence and self-worth. "How long have you known about this?" I asked Sarah, my voice barely audible. "I found the first posts about 6 months ago," she admitted. "A mutual friend from your old job sent them to me because she was concerned. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without destroying your marriage if I was wrong." About what was happening. "You weren't wrong," I said, finally understanding the full scope of what I had gotten myself into. That afternoon, I went home to our apartment and looked around at the life I had built with David. All the photos on the walls, all the furniture we had chosen together, all the baby preparations we had made, everything looked different now. Instead of symbols of love and partnership, they looked like evidence of my own willingness to disappear into someone else's vision of what my life should be. When David came home from work that evening, I was sitting at our kitchen table with printouts of every Facebook post Sarah had shown me. "We need to talk," I said calmly. David looked at the papers scattered across the table, and I watched his face change as he realized what he was seeing. For just a moment, he looked genuinely shocked, as if he had no idea his mother had been documenting and sharing every detail of our private lives. "Rebecca, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted. "Can you explain why your mother has been making fun of me to her friends for 2 years? Can you explain why she's been sharing strategies for controlling me with a group of women who think daughters-in-law are enemies to be defeated?" David sat down heavily in the chair across from me. For a long moment, he just stared at the evidence of his mother's betrayal. When he finally looked up, I expected to see embarrassment, anger at his mother, maybe even an apology. Instead, I saw calculation. "Look," he said finally, "I know some of this sounds bad, but you have to understand, my mother loves you. She's just protective of our family, and sometimes she expresses that in ways that might seem harsh to outsiders." "Outsiders?" I stared at him in disbelief. "David, I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. How am I an outsider?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "I just meant that people who don't understand our family dynamics might misinterpret." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. I need you to listen to me very carefully, because this is important. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your mother. I'm asking you to choose between treating me with respect and treating me like a problem to be managed." David was quiet for a long time. I watched him struggle with the decision, and in that struggle, I saw everything I needed to know about our marriage. This shouldn't have been a difficult choice. A husband who loved his wife wouldn't have needed to think about whether she deserved basic dignity and respect. Finally, he spoke. "My mother has been part of my life for 34 years. She's never let me down, never abandoned me, never put anyone else before our family. She's earned my loyalty in ways that—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "In ways that I haven't?" I finished for him. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." That night, I made a decision that terrified me but felt absolutely necessary. I couldn't bring my child into a family where manipulation was disguised as love, where my worth as a person was determined by how well I performed gratitude for treatment that grew more demeaning every day. I called Dr. Chen first. "I need to know," I said, "if something happened and I needed to leave my current living situation immediately, would that be safe for the baby this close to my due date?" "Rebecca," she said carefully, "are you in danger?" I don't think I'm in physical danger, I said. But I think I'm in a situation that's going to get much worse once the baby arrives, and I need to know my options. Dr. Chin connected me with a social worker who specialized in helping women in difficult family situations. Within 24 hours, I had a safety plan, a temporary place to stay, and a clearer understanding of my legal rights as both a wife and a mother. The hardest part was admitting to myself that the family I had desperately wanted to be part of had never really wanted me. They had wanted a grateful, manageable woman who would provide them with children while never challenging their authority or demanding equal treatment. 3 days later, while David was at work and Patricia was at her book club, I packed 2 suitcases and left. I didn't take much, just my essential belongings, important documents, and the baby things I had bought with my own money. I left a letter for David explaining my decision and my terms for any future relationship, immediate couples counseling, clear boundaries with his mother, and a genuine commitment to building a marriage based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical control. I moved in temporarily with Sarah while I figured out my next steps. 2 days later, I went into labor. My daughter, Emma Grace, was born at 6:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning. She was healthy, beautiful, and perfect in every way that mattered. As I held her for the first time, I realized that I had made the right choice. I wanted to raise a daughter who knew her own worth, who would never accept being treated as less than equal, who would understand that love without respect isn't really love at all. David came to the hospital, of course. So did Patricia. They both seemed genuinely shocked that I had actually left, as if they had never considered that there might be consequences for their treatment of me. "This is ridiculous," Patricia said, barely glancing at her granddaughter. "All families have their difficulties. You can't just run away every time things get complicated." But David surprised me. Looking at Emma, something seemed to shift in his face. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe we should give Rebecca some space right now." It was the first time in our entire relationship that I had seen him prioritize my needs over his mother's preferences, even in such a small way. Over the next few weeks, we began the slow process of trying to figure out whether our marriage could be salvaged. David agreed to counseling, though he struggled with the therapist's suggestion that his mother's behavior had been manipulative and damaging. Patricia, predictably, refused to acknowledge that she had done anything wrong and began a campaign to turn the extended family against me. But something fundamental had changed in me during those 3 days when I chose to protect my daughter and myself instead of preserving a peace that was destroying us both. I had learned that I could survive on my own, that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and that being alone was better than being in a relationship where I constantly had to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. 6 months later, David and I are still in counseling. Some days are better than others. He's made real efforts to set boundaries with his mother, though it's an ongoing struggle. Patricia and I have very limited contact, which suits both of us just fine. The extended family has mostly chosen sides, but I've discovered that the people worth keeping in my life are the ones who believe I deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of my family background or financial status. Emma is healthy, happy, and surrounded by love, just not the kind of love I originally thought we needed. She has a mother who models self-respect, friends who have become chosen family, and a father who is slowly learning what it means to truly put his wife and child first. Most importantly, she has a mother who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that teaches your children that they don't matter. The elderly woman on the subway was right to say shame on you. But I've learned that the shame wasn't mine to carry. The shame belongs to anyone who thinks pregnancy, financial dependence, or a lack of biological family makes someone less deserving of basic human dignity. I'm telling you this story because I know there are other women out there who might be in similar situations, maybe not exactly the same, but dealing with people who disguise control as love, who use your gratitude against you, who make you feel like asking for respect is asking for too much. You are not asking for too much. You deserve to be treated well by the people who claim to love you. And if they can't treat you well, you deserve the strength to protect yourself and your children from their dysfunction, even when it means walking away from the life you thought you wanted. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this, where someone's love came with conditions that slowly chipped away at your sense of self? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let other people know they're not alone. The end.